It's probably already happened to you. There you are, sat, waiting for Windows to update, and then all of a sudden that weird kid starts talking to you about how trash Windows is and how you should be using Linux. You are too intimidated to ask, but deep down you desperately wonder, what even is Linux?
What perfect timing. You just happen to be watching this video, created by two of those weird kids in question, so we'll tell you. Technically speaking, Linux is the core part of an operating system, called a kernel, originally created by our Lord and Saviour, Linus Torvalds. But, in layman's terms, when people say Linux, they usually mean an operating system, similar to Windows or Mac OS.
The big difference is that Linux is open source. That means the code behind it is public. People can read it, study it, copy it, suggest changes, and in some cases, help improve it. But, important detail, that doesn't mean anyone can just walk in and change the official version. There are still people in charge of reviewing changes and deciding what gets accepted.
Enough technical terminology, let's take a more understandable analogy. How about a community cookbook?
Yeah, that should do it. Let's look at the parallels between open source software and a community cookbook. The maintainers are like editors of the cookbook. They're responsible for reviewing suggestions, deciding what should be included, and making sure everything stays coherent, and publishing new editions. Most people simply enjoy the meals made from the cookbook, without ever opening it or changing anything. Likewise, most software users simply use the finished product. Some people like experimenting with the recipes themselves. They use the cookbook directly, adjust things to their tastes, and understand how everything works, but they don't necessarily contribute anything back. Contributors are like cooks who discover a better way of preparing a dish, or notice a mistake and suggest improvement to the editor so everyone can benefit. A pull request is simply the process by which someone sends their suggested modifications to the editor, who can then review, discuss, accept, or reject them. Large companies are like restaurant chains that rely on the recipes from the community cookbook. Some simply use the recipes, some employ chefs who help improve them, and others may try to influence which recipes become popular because their own business depends on them.
Now, if you're thinking that all of this sounds rather complicated and that you would rather just buy ready-made meals from a larger supermarket, that is perfectly understandable. Most people don't write recipes and some don't even cook. Likewise, only a small fraction of software users even contribute to open source projects.
Exactly. Yet those few enthusiastic cooks and editors are the reason the cookbook keeps improving. And while disagreements, personality clashes, or conflict with large restaurant chains can sometimes arise, the end result is that everyone, including the people who simply enjoy the finished meal, benefit from the work of the community.
Of course, every kitchen has its disagreements, people argue over ingredients, recipes, and who should decide what ends up in the next edition of the cookbook. And when large restaurant chains start depending on those recipes, things can get spicy. Speaking of, let's get to the meat and potatoes of this video. Today, we'll be looking at some of the tensions currently simmering in the world of open source. From disagreements between contributors and maintainers, to the effects of AI-generated noise, we've got a few examples on the menu.
We'll start with a fairly recent example. It's about the pressure placed on individual maintainers. In the case of NVMe Tricita, a widely used open source project, the sole unpaid maintainer ended up burning out after a hostile reaction from a few community members over some changes in the project. The technical details are not really the important part here. The important part is that this was a project many people used, but very few people actually helped maintain.
In cookbook terms, imagine one editor has been keeping a huge cookbook up to date for years, unpaid, in their free time. They fix mistakes, update recipes, check suggestions, publish new versions, and generally keep the whole thing up to date and in order. One day, they update a recipe to match the equipment the cookbook has officially required for a while. Some readers are annoyed because they still had been using older equipment, and instead of politely asking for help or sticking with the older recipe, they start attacking the editor.
This is completely insane. You cannot just rewrite the whole recipe to require a bigger spoon. These sorts of changes are an insane burden for the community.
This recipe has officially required a bigger spoon for a long time, since people apparently keep ignoring that and complaining that their smaller spoon doesn't work. I rewrote the recipe to make the requirement clearer. For now, you can still use the old recipe. Nobody is forcing you to use the new one.
No, actually, it is a recipe and it's modification that make people like burden. Please go switch to something that doesn't require interacting with people.
Okay.
And that was basically it. The editor quit his role and archived the cookbook. It has not been updated since, and so far nobody's really taken the role of maintaining it.
This shows one of the biggest hidden weaknesses of open source. A lot of important projects are maintained by one or two people, often unpaid, often in their free time. But users sometimes treat them like a customer support department. The problem is that they're not a company. They're people giving away their evenings for free. And if enough people shout at the chef, eventually the chef leaves the kitchen.
Our next example is more serious, XZ.
XZ is a compression tool. That sounds boring, and to be fair, it is. But boring software is often the most important kind. XZ is used deep inside Linux systems and servers. Most people have never heard of it, but a lot of important software quietly depends on it. The maintainer of XZ had been working on the projects for many years and had been considering stepping away. Since XZ was used by so many systems, somebody trustworthy had to help maintain it. Over the course of several years, a contributor named Jia Tan became increasingly involved with the project. They helped out, gained trust, and eventually received more responsibility. Unfortunately, that trust had turned out to be misplaced. After gaining enough control, Jia Tan introduced malicious code intended to create a backdoor into systems using XZ. Had it gone unnoticed, it could have affected a huge number of machines around the world. Fortunately, before the compromised version was widely deployed, another developer, Andreas Freund, noticed some unusual behaviour and investigated it further. He managed to uncover the attack before it could spread.
In cookbook terms, imagine a flour supplier used by bakeries all over the world. The owner is tired. They have been running the place for years. Not many people want to help, and they are looking to step back. Then, a very enthusiastic worker gradually starts helping more and more. They seem reliable, they take on responsibility, and eventually the owner trusts them enough to hand over part of the meal. But the new worker has other plans. Instead of producing quality flour like in the past, he is more interested in chemical warfare. He decides to lace the flour with potent neurotoxins in an attempt to poison the population. But then a quality tester spots that something is slightly off. Maybe the dough behaves weirdly, maybe the oven takes longer than usual. They investigate and realize the flour has been tampered with before it reaches the bakeries across the world.
The important lesson here is not that open source is automatically unsafe. In fact, the attack was discovered because someone could investigate suspicious behaviour. The kitchen was open enough for someone to notice the flour smelled funny. But it does show that open source depends heavily on trust, and when software used by millions is maintained by just a few tired people, that creates a real risk.
Our last example today is curl. Curl is one of the largest and most widely used open source projects out there. Chances are that if you have used the internet today, something somewhere has used curl behind the scenes. Because of its importance, the project had a bug bounty program. That means people who found genuine security vulnerabilities could be rewarded for helping improve the software. Unfortunately, as AI tools became more popular, some people realized they could simply ask AI to look for bugs on their behalf and submit whatever came back, hoping to earn the rewards. The problem was that many of these reports had never been tested by the people submitting them. They were often poorly researched or simply wrong. Eventually, the maintainers were receiving so many reports that they could no longer reasonably process them all. They had trouble distinguishing real vulnerabilities from AI-generated noise at a glance. As a result, the curl project decided to suspend the bug bounty program.
One last cooking analogy. Imagine you're a baker with a public cookbook, and you announce that anyone who discovers a genuine mistake or improvement in one of your recipes will receive a reward. For years, this works perfectly. People occasionally write to you saying, I think you accidentally put 2 tablespoons of salt instead of 1, and if they're right, you thank them and give them the prize. But then, someone discovers that they can ask ChatGPT to generate 50 possible improvements, and simply mail them all to you. Soon, you're receiving hundreds of letters every day. Half of them suggest replacing sugar with honey. The other half claim your chocolate cake may spontaneously explode. And most of the people sending them have not even tried baking the recipe themselves. Eventually, you realise that you're spending more time reading letters than actually baking, so you close the competition, not because you dislike feedback, but because you simply don't have enough hours in the day to test hundreds of recipes that are probably wrong. At that point, the feedback is no longer helping the kitchen, it's just throwing flour everywhere.
So, the problem here is not simply AI bad. The problem here is responsibility. A useful bug report is like a tested recipe correction. An AI-generated guess submitted without checking becomes unpaid work for the maintainers. And if enough people do that, even a good system can get buried in the noise.
So, as a summary of the current challenges in open source software, we can say that this kind of system relies on trust, time, and a lot of unpaid work. This can lead to all kinds of problems: maintainers burning out, malicious actors exploiting trust, or AI-generated spam making already difficult work even harder.
But the takeaway is not that open source is bad. In many cases, open source is more transparent, more flexible, and more resilient than closed software. It allows people to inspect the code, improve it, adapt it, and build on top of it. But it is not magic. Behind every public cookbook, there are real editors, real cooks, real trust relationships, and real limits.
The future of open source probably depends less on whether the code is public, and more whether the communities around it become sustainable. That means better support for maintainers, clearer rules around responsibilities, better ways to handle security, and probably some serious thinking about how AI should and shouldn't be used. AI could become a useful assistant for open source projects. It could also become a machine that produces endless, low-quality suggestions. Realistically, it will probably be a bit of both.
Open source has survived corporate pressure, community drama, security scares, and now it has AI knocking on the kitchen door with a suspiciously large stack of untested recipes.
Only time will tell whether that becomes a helpful sous chef or just another thing for the maintainers to clean up.
Thanks for your attention.